Hi folks, Mike here from PoconoTherapy.com. I wanted to touch on one of the components of recovery that I introduced in the first video, but it requires a little bit more depth because it is routinely ignored by most people in recovery, um, and was routinely ignored by myself, particularly in the first 2 years of recovery. However, but before I jump into the topic extracted from last video, I want to introduce my little friend here. This is Annie, aka the Precious. Must have the Precious. She's old as the hills. She's going on 16 years this year. Annie's a cross between a dachshund and a beagle, which is called a dactyl. However, if you were to observe her in her natural habitat here in the Enchanted Forest, uh, you'd swear she has penguin genes in her. It's just like some kind of doppelpenguin. The way she sits and walks, it's quite odd. It's like she was some kind of a hybridization lab experiment going horribly wrong. But somebody felt sorry for her and rescued her, and she made her way to me. And I am very privileged to have spent 16 years with this anomaly of nature. Um, she also has Lyme disease, and I did touch on the treatment, some of the treatment protocols for that in the last video. Um, She also utilizes some of the same protocols, not as much. I mean, she's got little 6-inch legs, and there's a little tiny pea brain in there, whereas I'm 5'10" and have this huge 3-pound gelatinous mass between my ears, which gets in the way all the time. Anyway, at this age, her role in life is primarily just to be a lump. And she's expert at just being a lump. She loves to lumpify. She just enjoys the lumpification process. In fact, I think she utilizes it strategically. She follows me into every room and waits strategically until I turn around, and then she falls into a lump, which I then turn around, trip over her all the time, and exclaim the same tired old expletives that she's heard a million times. And she looks at me as if to say, well, watch where you're going, moron. But, yeah. So, we're going to put her down and let her engage the lumpification process, because she'll start gretzing because she doesn't like activity. All right, come on. Yep, there we go. That's a good girl. There we go. You can lump. Go ahead, do your lump. Houston, we have initiated lumpification. Anyway, let's get into the topic real quick because I don't want this video to be too long. As I said, I want to extract or actually one key component of recovery that is routinely ignored. In fact, I met with 3 people today in a recovery process, and yeah, we really had to touch on this component. And this component is just what you put into your body, what you consume. Now, obviously, recreational drugs, alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, ingredients I recall quite well. I don't want to touch on that. I want to touch on something that's usually ignored more often. So if you're engaged in a chemical behavioral addiction recovery, have experienced trauma, you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, MS, chronic fatigue syndrome, you have chronic pain, or diagnosed with a mental illness, depression, anxiety, panic, OCD, or you've endured cancer treatment or any other type of treatment, you have diabetes, you cannot ignore diet. So what is dietary stress? Well, dietary stress is simply the state of internalized stress, primarily to the digestive system, resulting from the belief that you can consume all the toxic inflammatory foods and chemicals you want on a daily basis and not inevitably experience consequences. My friends, the science is out. The standard American diet, or SAD, S-A-D, is literally killing us. Every year there is a rise in heart disease, obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, cancer, mental illness, etc., etc., etc. Every year there's on the rise. With all the medications and all the treatments and all the new hospitals and urgent cares, it doesn't make a difference. These disorders are increasing. There has to be a common denominator. So the question is that you have to ask yourself, what happens when for many years you consume foods that have become or are toxic to your body? What happens when you ingest copious amounts of chemicals over many years, such as processed foods, alcohols, drugs, nicotine, caffeine, and for some, sugar and wheat? Well, what happens is called inflammation. Increasingly, research is identifying depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses as not standalone disorders to be treated in isolation, but symptoms of systemic bodily inflammation, particularly in the gut, which also contains 70 to 80% of your immune system. So if that's inflamed, that sets you up for all kinds of other illnesses and conditions. This is why most mental health disorders involve some form of IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. Keep in mind, you're not only connected up to a central and peripheral nervous system, but you're also connected to an enteric nervous system, which includes the vagus nerve, which runs from the brain to the gut, which means that any chronic disturbance or inflammation down below will reach topside, just as any issues, conditions topside will inevitably fall down below. Now, I just recently perused some research that's pointing to vitamin D depletion as the main cause of headaches and migraines. So think, something as simple as vitamin D depletion is the cause of many folks having migraines and severe headaches. And if you live out here in the enchanted forest of the Pocono Mountains, I think we had sun today for about an hour. It's been about 2, maybe 3 weeks since the sun's been out. And keep in mind, vitamin D is actually a hormone. You make it in your body. Yes, you can take it as a supplement, so that's why we refer to it as a vitamin. But you need sunlight. So when that sun's out there, go out there, absorb it. I do. So we want to talk about inflammation and one of the chief causes of inflammation. And the science, which you'll find that I've referred to and linked up with on the blog, is pointing to two particular components, but one is very poignant and enhanced. Sugar. Sugar. Yes, we love it. We eat it every day as a staple food. Sugar is one of the most toxic foods in our diet. It is estimated that on average we consume 32 ounces of sugar every day. And that's not just white sugar. We're talking about particularly high fructose corn syrup, other sugars such as agave nectar, barley malt, dextrose, maltose, rice syrup, dextrin. The list is endless. The other day I was in the grocery store. We had the big shop right here. It's supposed to be the biggest in the world. And you can get lost in that place. And there's so much to buy. So I just went in. I get my food delivered to me for the most part. So I went in, and I just on a whim, I went up to the refrigerated section. And I pull out this, what we used to call TV dinners, but now we microwave it. It had potatoes in one portion, and it had some vegetables, and there was a hunk of meat in the middle. They called it Swiss steak. So I turned over the frozen meal and I looked at the ingredients, and it had 20 grams of sugar. Why would this meal require sugar? But it did. It's in everything. I had a gentleman I met the other day. We looked at, he came in, it was about 6 in the afternoon, and he had a huge Dunkin' Donuts, I think he called it a latte. I'm not real familiar with the coffee terms. It was a latte. It had caramel, pumpkin, stuff. And my first question was, wow, you can drink that at this time? Because I wouldn't be able to sleep at all if I drank that because of the caffeine. His response was, well, this is my 4th one today. I was like, wait, what? Aren't you on, didn't the doctor prescribe you a medication for anxiety? Well, yeah. But not only that, we went online to look at how much sugar was in each. And then he told me he had 4 of these that day. And the amount of sugar was astronomical. So, yeah, depression, anxiety, gut inflammation, toxic food, sugar, it's something you want to look into. Not everybody. It shouldn't be a staple every day. You want to have sugar once in a while? Sure. But if you're in recovery, you may want to look at total elimination. But we'll talk more about that. The other product is wheat. If you're in recovery, there's a good possibility your body is in some form of chronic inflammation due to years of stress. And research is pointing to the fact that chronic inflammation is further aggravated by wheat, or more specifically, gluten. You may have been able to process all this stuff, wheat and sugar, in your younger years. But you got to understand, metabolism slows down with age. So that makes the processing of these chemicals much more debilitating and damaging to the whole system. So I'm just briefly touching on these on the blog, which this video is on, to introduce the topic. There are many more videos, and we'll talk about that. The other thing you want to look at, because as we get older, if we're in recovery, sensitivity. We become, because of inflammation, we can become very sensitive to light, sounds, noises, hot, cold, certain smells, definitely certain foods. Out here in the enchanted forest, come spring, I'm a blubbering idiot. The fluid's flying out of my face because of the pollen out here. Never used to bother me, but now, because of the autoimmune disease, I'm more sensitive to a lot of different things. For instance, just recently, in the last 2 months, I've been getting migraines, inflammation, waking with inflammation. And for the past year, up until those 2.5 months, I was utilizing the same treatment protocols. Everything was fine. I had very few flare-ups from the Lyme, and things were great. But these headaches, they kept coming every morning at different levels. And I'm like, what has changed that I would have these headaches like this? So I reflected, I analyzed, and I realized in the past 2.5 months, I have moved from the big bedroom into the small bedroom, guest room. So now, you wouldn't think that's a big deal. The reason I did that was to cut down. It costs more to heat that. And out here in my little chalet in the enchanted forest, we have electric heat, which is completely and totally inefficient and massively expensive. So then I looked, okay, the little bedroom, here's the rub. In that little bedroom, the bed sits against the wall, about a foot above my head. Behind the little cabinet is the circuit breaker box. Outside, behind the circuit breaker box, is the electric meter. Essentially, every night when I go to sleep, it's like I'm sleeping 7 to 8 hours in a functional MRI machine and waking up with massive migraines. Now, I slept in that room for years. It shouldn't be a problem. But now, because of the compromised immune system, it has become a problem, and I'm sensitive to that. So we moved back into the big bedroom, and headaches went away. I can even look, and when I reflect, it took a while to reflect, back when I first was diagnosed with the Lyme disease. That was back in 2011. I had the bullseye from the tick, and numerous symptoms came out of that. But then when I reflect, I've lived up here in the Enchanted Forest for 17 years. I've pulled dozens and dozens of ticks off of me and never had a problem. But here's the rub in that. 2010, 2011, there was incredible amounts of stress in my life. There was also excess use of alcohol and excess use of nicotine, which since has to have been eliminated. So my immune system was compromised due to the stress. So in the spring, summer of 2011, the tick that bit me had Sneaky Pete, the spirochete, that got through and multiplied. And so came the symptoms. So I, for one, really cannot touch sugar. I don't, as much as humanly possible. And wheat, I've pretty much eliminated. These things you might get occasionally. If I do, I usually pay for it. I do want to warn, however, if you want to eliminate certain foods that are staples, particularly sugar and wheat, from your diet, you want to do it, you want to taper down. Because the problem with cold turkey is there's a reaction, and I put a link on the web to this called the Herxheimer reaction, or Herxing, Herxheimer. What happens with wheat and sugar is both of those produce in your body glucose, sugar. That's the type of sugar that the body can use, glucose. Unfortunately, there is a bacteria in your gut called Candida. You might want to research that. Candida feeds off of sugar and wheat, or glucose. Okay, and a lot of people, because they eat a lot of these substances, wind up with Candida overgrowth, which causes symptoms of its own. The problem is, if you go cold turkey in stopping sugar and wheat, immediately stopping, you wind up with the Candida die-off. It's also called that, Candida die-off. Sometimes some people refer to it as the carb flu, but it's also referred to technically as the Herxheimer reaction, which the best way I can describe it, because I went cold turkey like an idiot, the best way I can describe it is nuclear Armageddon in the bathroom. But I won't go into detail. So it's important for you to identify dietary stressors and identify all the stressors. So this was important because it's ignored. I know when I first was diagnosed with Lyme disease, I figured I could just keep eating all the crap I was eating, and I was eating a lot. I love junk food. I do. I love it. I miss it. Sometimes I miss it. I get cravings. But I work through it. I overcome. I know my triggers. So I think this is enough for now. I'm going to keep this brief. On the blog, I've put up 4 videos. One is by a Dr. Perlmutter, who wrote the book Grain Brain. Listen to what he has to say. Go out to YouTube or out to the web and read more of his information. Okay? He's very astute. He's very knowledgeable about what grains, particularly wheat and gluten, do to the system. The second video was another doctor. His name escapes me in this moment. Oh, Lustig, Dr. Lustig. He reports on the toxicity of sugar to the body, particularly as a staple. We're not formatted, constructed to process all this sugar. It's toxic, and it's causing all kinds of disease and disorders. So, and the third is a another doctor, Ramsey, I think I'm pronouncing it right. I don't have the blog up in front of me. He actually is a psychiatrist who is supporting and advocating dietary changes for mood disorders. And the third video is another doctor, and I do not remember her name. She reports on how we can reverse type 2 diabetes, which is a new phenomenon. When I was a kid, there was no type 2 diabetes. Where'd that come from? Sugar, wheat. And how to reverse that through diet by not following the FDA guidelines. Which essentially, in the next couple of years, we're going to find out that those FDA guidelines and the food pyramid has been causing a lot of problems. But that's it for now. Read the blog, click the links, educate yourself. I don't recommend what you should do. I recommend you educate yourself, gather the information, and make up your own mind. All right, guys, stay strong, keep the faith.